According to a recent Goldman Sachs study, nearly 60% of people are worried they'll run out of money before they pass away. And let's be real, that's not some abstract fear. That's the kind of thing that sits in the back of your mind. It pops up when the market drops, when you check your account balance, or when you start thinking, what if I live longer than I planned? It's a quiet stress, but it's constant. And here's the thing. Most people assume that fear comes from being reckless or not saving enough. But in my experience, that's usually not the case at all. When I was working as a financial advisor, I saw something interesting. There was a specific set of data that almost every time I showed it to clients changed how they felt about retirement. Not in a motivational way, not with wishful thinking, but in a very real, measurable way. You could literally see the tension come down. So in this video, I want to walk you through that same data, step by step, and show you why this fear, while totally understandable, is often way bigger than the actual risk. By the end, my goal is simple: to help you stop guessing, stop stressing, and replace fear with clarity.
Most retirement advice kicks off with a super common rule of thumb. You've probably heard it before. The idea is that you'll need about 80% of your pre-retirement income to live comfortably once you stop working. Sounds simple, right? If a couple spends about $100,000 a year before retirement, the assumption is they'll need around $80,000 every year afterward to keep the same lifestyle. And honestly, on the surface, that sounds pretty logical. It feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels like solid financial planning. But here's where things start to get interesting. Because when Goldman Sachs actually looked at real retirees, not theories, not spreadsheets, not textbook models, they found something that surprised a lot of people. They studied how satisfied retirees actually felt based on how much money they were spending compared to their working years. And what they discovered was kind of wild. Retirees reported almost identical happiness levels whether they were spending about 50% or 80% of their pre-retirement income. Yeah, you heard that right. Someone spending half of what they used to spend often reported feeling just as satisfied as someone spending way more. Now, think about that for a second. Because most people assume happiness in retirement scales directly with spending. More money equals more comfort. More comfort equals more happiness. That sounds logical. But real life doesn't always work like that. And honestly, if you talk to actual retirees, this starts making a lot more sense. When people retire, their spending naturally shifts. Some expenses just straight up disappear. You're not commuting anymore. You're not buying work clothes. You're not paying for daily lunches, office coffees, and dry cleaning every week. And let's be real. Nobody misses rush hour traffic. That alone feels like getting a raise. Then there are lifestyle changes people don't always expect. A lot of retirees slow down a little. They cook more at home. They focus more on hobbies, family time, or travel that isn't tied to work schedules. Sometimes their lives actually become simpler, but in a good way. Not cheaper because they're forced to cut back. Cheaper because they're choosing what actually matters to them. And here's another thing people don't talk about enough. When you're working, a lot of spending is tied to stress or convenience. Quick meals because you're exhausted. Impulse purchases because you've had a long week. Subscriptions you barely use because you don't have time to notice them. Retirement changes that rhythm. People have time to be intentional. And when people become more intentional with money, something surprising usually happens. They often spend less, but enjoy it more. Now, here's where the 80% rule can quietly cause problems. It sounds like helpful guidance, but what it often does is plant this idea in people's heads that retirement requires this massive mountain of money before they're allowed to relax. And that belief can push people into working longer than they actually need to. I've seen people delay retirement by years, not because they were unprepared, but because they were chasing a number that wasn't truly connected to their real lifestyle needs. They were grinding, saving, stressing, trying to hit a target that might have been way higher than necessary. And don't get me wrong, saving aggressively is not a bad thing. Having margin and flexibility is awesome, but there's a big difference between being financially prepared and being financially paralyzed. Sometimes that 80% rule creates this quiet pressure where people feel like they're behind, even when they're doing just fine. And that pressure builds over time. It shows up in conversations like, "I don't think I can retire yet. I probably need just a little more saved. Maybe 5 more years just to be safe." And suddenly, 5 years turns into 10. Meanwhile, they're sacrificing healthy years, travel years, grandkid years, all because they're trying to hit a benchmark that may not actually reflect real retirement behavior. And here's the key takeaway. The data isn't saying people should plan to spend less. That's not the message. The message is that lifestyle satisfaction in retirement is way more flexible than people think. There isn't one magic number that guarantees happiness. Retirement isn't a math equation where comfort flips on at exactly 80%. It's more like a range, and most people land somewhere in that range naturally once they stop working. Some people spend more early on while they're active and traveling. Some people spend less and prioritize simplicity. Some people adjust over time as life evolves. That flexibility is actually one of the biggest hidden strengths of retirement planning. But most rules of thumb don't capture that. They focus on fixed targets. Real life works more like adjustable dials. And once people understand that, you can almost see their shoulders drop a little, because retirement stops feeling like this pass-fail test and starts feeling more like a transition that they can adapt to.
And maybe retirement was never about replacing your income, it was about replacing your stress. Because the biggest expense people carry into retirement isn't money, it's expectation. When work stops, life doesn't shrink, it changes shape. People trade packed schedules for slow mornings. And suddenly, time becomes more valuable than income ever was. The real lesson isn't how much they saved, it's how they learned to live differently. So maybe the question isn't, do I have enough money? Maybe the better question is, what kind of life am I saving for? Because retirement isn't the end of working, it's the beginning of choosing. The people who understand this early stop chasing numbers and start designing freedom. And that's why the biggest retirement myth might be the one we never questioned.